Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Pollock and Thurston. We have lots to discuss coming out of SummerSlam weekend. We will be discussing the most recent season of Dark Side of the Ring. We're going to dive into numbers. We've got slides on this show, courtesy of Brandon Thurston. And joining us as we go deep into WCW legal mess, it is the one and only David Bixenspan. You know him, you love him from Between the Sheets, Wrestling Inc., all over the place. David, welcome to the show.
Well, not Wrestling Inc. anymore. I've been traded to Slash Gear for future consideration.
Oh boy, I'm not up on my media transactions of late. I'm sorry, I didn't get that on the.
Yes, I've been shifted around to the tech site within the static media.
Between the Sheets, a must listen for everyone. So right off the top, Bix, as you and Chris Zellner are diving into the racial discrimination lawsuit, did you agree with Jeff Jarrett that Bash at the Beach was the biggest black mark in the history of WCW?
I don't know how much Jeff was necessarily paying attention to that lawsuit, so I'm going to give him a bit of a pass on that.
Yes, it was not one of WCW's shining moment, but I mean, this is a company that had many moments that would be up for consideration. So a lot of the focus of why we wanted to have you on today was to talk about the lawsuit and the insanity that came out of Bash at the Beach. But have you had a chance yet to see the Marty Jannetty episode? Any sort of overall thoughts in terms of how Marty was presented and kind of in line with the tone of a lot of the topics this season?
Yeah, I watched it as it aired last night. I mean, I think the key takeaway I have is the same one that everyone else has, which is that with the story of killing the guy who was a predator behind the bowling alley, from the way he was telling it, which did not sound like the way he was telling his tall tales throughout the episode, and that he told other people who they talked to decades ago, I don't know if he necessarily killed the guy, but it does seem like he's telling a true story from a real trauma, at least.
And they present it like a hypothetical, like it's the O.J. Simpson book or something.
Yeah, but then after he does say specifically, when he's saying that he didn't kill a guy or the guy, he does say outright that the thing in the guy groping him in the car happened. He does actually say that specifically.
Yeah,
when he's denying the rest.
Yeah, it sort of had I likened it to the same way the Matt Bourne episode ended, where it suddenly became this sort of murder mystery that they focused on. This one, I think, having a bit more relevance to people in the sense that they're at least aware of the story and going into it. I mean, you can come out of that, and I mean, I don't think anything was said so much in the episode that was this smoking gun. I don't think like an investigation is going to come out of this, but I think you could certainly leave it with the is your possibility that he murdered this individual heightened from this episode? I can see that. I don't know. I don't know how people necessarily take this when, I mean, it's just how Marty is presented in this whole episode. It's very easy to also just dismiss it with everything else, unless you sort of can discern truth from fiction with Marty, which is tough to do sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, the takeaway I had, and I think that you guys would probably agree with, is even if he didn't kill the guy, even if it's not exactly true as he told it, it's informed by something bad that happened to him, it seems like, regardless. And I think we can all agree on that.
I think so. Like that aspect of it, I think you have certainly is a bit of a more clear picture than how it was originally the story came out and such. That was just so focused on the murder and not necessarily what led to it behind that bowling alley and such. But yeah, it was an episode. I don't know what people's opinions are going to be coming out of it. I found it to be a pretty depressing story of an individual who's in great pain and is going to be for the rest of their life, and has just this clinging to sort of what if, like, if my career had gone right instead of left, I would have been all into fame and fortune. And it's sort of, here is a guy that just had numerous obstacles, many of which were that he was responsible for throughout his career. And here at the end of it, it's just a sad story of a guy of where he is in life.
Yeah, and I also think that the whole murder, whatever story, and then kind of which I thought they did a good job, not like hitting you over the head necessarily with the idea of like, okay, something happened to him. But I feel like it also kind of it did work with the rest of the episode in the sense it's like, okay, there's some stuff this guy is burying that clearly caused a lot of these issues. It felt like.
Brandon, did you have any strong thoughts on Marty Jannetty?
I guess I didn't realize or didn't remember, I guess, that there was such a reconciliation between Sean and Marty. And I thought that was at least nice. I thought they were maybe just still to this day not really on talking terms. But I didn't know about the whole story about Sean calling him up and bringing him to this church organization, I guess. And but I guess I forgot too that he was brought back to WWE, signed, and then quickly fell into more legal trouble and got let go.
Yeah.
I think there were a pair of those. I was looking it up yesterday. The number I saw was like 8 times he's been in and out of the company.
Because was that the run where he has the match with Kurt Angle?
That's the 2005 one. And then there's another one the next year that is not covered in this. That's in the lead up to Shawn and Vince at WrestleMania. And he comes in he was going to be in for a role. And then I think it was the same thing where he was under house arrest and couldn't get like a day pass to continue going back each week. And they just washed their hands of Marty at this point.
I think there was one after that, because didn't he get hired as a producer after that?
I'm not recalling
briefly, or got a tryout or something.
Could have,
because that would make it. Because that would make it 8 then, because you have the 5 in the 80s and 90s, and then that would be 3.
Yeah, that would bring you up to 8. He did another cameo around one of the anniversary shows at the end of 2007, and maybe that coincided with at least some kind of producer run. But
maybe.
Yeah, I don't know if Marty was cut out to be a producer. I would think that would be that would seem like a lot of responsibility on the man's shoulders. But it's an unfortunate story of a guy, a really, really talented individual that for a lot of the audience became a punchline years later. But there's a really tragic story underneath all of this that I hope people don't take away just like look at this as some kind of like punchline or comedic element. There's a lot of, as you mentioned, Bix, like trauma that is probably the foundation of this guy's life, and went into an industry that he was just chewed up in, physically and probably mentally too.
And also in terms of the talent, like, I'm curious to hear what Brandon thinks of this as a wrestler. Like, I feel like even if Shawn Michaels turned into a better worker, I don't think it's a stretch at all to say that at least when they were teaming, Jannetty was more talented. That he was the more of a physical natural in the ring and was more physically talented than Shawn.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a strong opinion on it. When I was a kid, I liked Marty Jannetty better, but I think you saw it in the Kurt Angle match that he had in the mid 2000s that he still could work at a pretty strong level. So he still, if he could keep his personal life intact, he could have had a much better run.
Yeah. I mean, the one other thing I guess before we move on is that, and we know at this point with 42 minutes, there's a lot you have to cut out just to make the runtime. The one thing that I feel like without getting into the weeds on other topics that would have really enhanced the episode, although I guess he would have had to get in the weeds to do it, is to explain that one of the big reasons that the whole murder confession blew up was it was not the first time that Marty Jannetty had randomly confessed to felonies online. So I feel like without that context, it's a little harder for the viewer to discern, okay, well, this guy's posting all this obvious bullshit on Facebook all the time. Why did people take this one story seriously? That's why. Because he had told stories, at least one of which had been corroborated by multiple people who were there, of doing some very unsavory illegal things.
Yeah, and I mean, what was the setup to the murder confession is the whole thing with his the DNA test with his daughter, and he just writes us off. Well, I was hacked. It's not real. And then I don't think any viewer is buying this from Marty. And then you're going into this story where you are, I think certainly your version of Marty's credibility is going to be a question when he's just writing off this thing. Well, I was hacked. I was hacked on Facebook, as we see the screenshot. And this, I can only describe it as Marty Jannetty language that it is written in, and you're trying to decipher what is even being written here.
Yeah, there are certain people. Marty Jannetty is one. I would say, going back to his whole controversy, Rob Feinstein is another. Where if they get in posting something online or saying something in the chat with someone online, and you see the chat or the post or whatever, you can usually pretty easily discern whether or not they wrote it. They have a very distinct way of writing things online.
Well, let's move from that one over to Bash at the Beach 2000, and we're going to focus a lot on the lawsuit that came out of this. That I would imagine people knew there was a lawsuit, but I don't think they necessarily are aware of just how long this thing greatly outlived WCW. This was like one of the remnants of WCW that many years later. In terms of just explaining the story, Bix, how did you feel they did so on the episode and taking, you had your competing talking heads in Bischoff and Russo and trying to outline this absolutely bizarre story to, I just can't imagine a non-fan digesting this and fully understanding it. But did you feel they did a pretty good job of it?
I thought they did do a pretty good job explaining the distinction of what Hogan sued for, what got thrown out, what didn't, what ended up surviving that Hogan probably got the settlement off of. The one quibble I would have, I guess, with that part is how do I put this? I think that was a section where you badly needed a neutral third party on screen as a talking head to sort through it. Because, you had Russo and Bischoff sniping back and forth. You have Russo talking about this fax from Hogan's old lawyer to WCW, and they have a copy of it and they show it on screen, so it's clearly a real thing. And then they have Eric denying it existed, but it doesn't even seem like Eric is necessarily deliberately lying. It seems like he doesn't remember, because I don't think Eric is dumb enough to deny that existed if he knew that there was a copy of it in the lawsuit. And then you have Dave Meltzer being like, I have wiped everything WCW 2000 related out of my brain. I can't help it.
There's also a disagreement about whether or not the case went to multiple courts. Where you have Russo making it sound like there were all these different courts and appeals that happened.
Yeah, that was the truth.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, so this did go to multiple courts.
Yes, this did go to appellate courts. I think it twice. So, and that, again, that's one where it's like, I don't like that they left it the way they did, because even, and they have Dave established that, like, and I'm sure they include that, for the benefit of the viewer, to set up the idea, you shouldn't necessarily trust either of these guys. But in that case, like, Russo was telling the truth. Eric, again, always with Eric, you never know how much is memory versus bullshit. But that's where it screamed out for, I don't know who you would get. I don't know if you would try to get one of the lawyers. I don't know if you would, in this case, maybe someone like Jack Encarnacio, because he's been over the stuff so backwards and forwards for Lapsed Fan episodes about Bash at the Beach 2000. I felt like you needed a neutral arbiter there to be able to say flatly, this is what happened. Because go ahead.
What was the appeal about? Was it about this issue around whether you can actually defame, and whether Russo did defame Hogan because he was, purportedly talking about a character, or was he really talking about a real person? Is that what it was about?
So I don't think, I may be wrong. I tried to refresh my memory as much as I could before we started. I don't think that made it as far in the appeals, the defamation thing. I think that was more about the language of the creative control clause and whether or not it only covered match outcomes or if it also covered all of Hogan's creative. And if I remember right, it was the appellate court initially said, or one court said that it specifically said matches, so it only meant matches. They did what they said, or Hogan said they would do for the actual match with Jarrett, so he didn't have a case. And then I believe an appellate court overruled that, saying that Russo basically nullified the finish of the match, effectively breaking Hogan's creative control, so that Hogan did have a case as far as that.
Which is pretty savvy for an appellate court to be able to like decipher like match outcomes versus what good is a match outcome if you can just override it in a promo afterward.
Right, exactly.
So
So go ahead.
I was more so just it's amazing that you present this to a court and they had a pretty good grasp on like creative control within a professional wrestling environment, more than I would anticipate. A court just looking at this and not just, you know, throwing this thing out is just totally ludicrous.
Yeah, and you know, and there's also just all the other layers just to the story in general, like, you know, that I think you and Wei talked about last week, you know, as far as like even the timeline as it is in the episode is a little off because, you know, like you brought it up. It was on the law the night before that Booker T was going to end the pay-per-view as champion.
Yeah. Dave Meltzer was on the law the night before, and they're openly talking about this. Like, this is the expected outcome, like Booker T getting the title. And I was trying to rack my brain. Booker T might have actually been on the show and been asked about this, but I can't 100% recall that. But that might.
I think I was listening live at the time too, but I don't recall.
Yeah, I don't have my my July 2000 cassette tapes backed up, but yeah, but this is like this was being discussed like that weekend, and it wasn't as though it was just like some small thing either. So I mean, there's that aspect to it. You've had Dave Penzer, who has you know, spoken about, you know, his side of being, you know, informing Booker T as such, like, hey, get ready for this on Sunday, and the way this all comes out. So I mean, there's that aspect to it, that going into the weekend, it seemed like this was fairly prevalent notion that Booker T is coming out of this weekend as your champion.
Yeah,
it goes against this whole tournament idea that Bischoff is discussing, which again, I looked at this and it was like, man, Bischoff and Russo, like they felt like, man, we had this golden angle and the other guy just ruined it. It was like, if only Russo didn't cut this promo, we were off to the races. And then you've got Russo, who's just like, man, we had this unbelievable story. Like they believed like this was not just salvageable. Like this was just one personality away from, you know, kicking things into high gear here in the summer of 2000. It's like such a divorce from the reality of WCW at this time, and their total loss of any kind of cohesion in terms of their online characters and stories.
Yeah, plus there are other things I come out of it wondering, like, what... Okay, if we're assuming that that Hogan and Bischoff had no idea what was coming up later, which I doubt they had no idea. Like, what did they know about, like, why did they think that they weren't going on last? Like, why, you know, if that's...
What did they think was going to close the pay-per-view, if not that?
Yeah, did they think it was going to be Nash and Goldberg? Like, did, you know, Hogan and Bischoff know about having the other title belt there? Because I don't think they talked about it in the episode, but one of the things that happened is this is shortly after they had the big gold belt cast and made copies that they gave to, I think it was every former champion that they had under contract at the time. And they had been using one of the copies a little bit. Jarrett comes out for the Hogan match with one of the copies. And, you know, then Russo cuts his promo about how that's not the WCW championship, that's the Hulk Hogan belt. And then Jarrett comes out with the original belt with the, you know, the visible bend in the middle for the main event with Booker. So, like, who knew that they had the two belts? Who was told to make sure they had the two belts? I don't know. It's like there's clearly something missing, and it's like part of the problem is too is even if they're not trying to work you, Bischoff and Hogan as well, even though he's not in the episode, they both have terrible memories. Like they are huge workers, but they both also have genuinely terrible memories. So
how about Jarrett in the episode? Like he certainly comes across easily like the most credible of the principal figures. Did you feel did you get a sense at all? Was he holding back? Did you feel he was pretty forthright in terms of his contributions? Because he's the one that I think people are going to take the most serious in this whole thing. And, you know, he really paints Hogan the most negative of the bunch.
Yeah. I thought he came off very credibly. I thought the most interesting part was what watching it felt like one of the biggest works of the whole thing, the, delayed Jarrett entrance. He's saying, and I don't think he has any reason to lie here, he's saying that was him genuinely not being sure he wanted to go out for the match. It comes off like it's part of the angle. It didn't detract from what they were planning. But I found that really interesting, that he was just like, and knowing the way that he thinks about his storylines, I think it tracks too that he's telling the truth about that, because he's talking about like the idea, even as a heel, that he's going out there and laying down and thinking about in an old school way how much that could hurt him. Like it makes me think about like when he quit WWF 5 years earlier, where, I think with some counseling from his dad, he came to realize, and I think rightfully so, with the whole storyline of where Road Dogg was going to be the one who it turned out had, really sung With My Baby Tonight, and it was supposed to be exposed at that July 95 In Your House where he lost the Intercontinental title to Michaels, and they did the lip syncing performance and all that. And then they quit in the middle of the show after the match. Jarrett's rationale was like, well, wait a second. The angle here is Rhodey exposes that he really sang the song and I didn't. Okay, I'm immediately a fraud. He's immediately given me my comeuppance. What's the story here? Where do I go from there? How is there anywhere for me to go but down? So like, knowing that he has that very analytical way of thinking about how he's presented, to me, that totally tracks that was his thought process at Bash at the Beach.
It's also not even brought up in the and I understand like the time constraints and stuff, but the fact that like they had just done this angle like not all that long ago in October with Hogan, like the other
with Hogan State,
like they had literally just done this. It's not as though this was even some novel idea that they had come up with that was breaking with convention, breaking the fourth wall on television.
And was Russo there at that time? I remember
that was happening. Russo's. I mean, that was basically Russo's first night in the company, wasn't it?
He did. I think
he did the pay-per-view before the TV, I think.
I think they were supposed to start on the night after Havoc, and they pushed it up a week. So he might have done Nitro, but it's absolutely his first pay-per-view. So it's his first, if not second show, and they're shooting this angle immediately. So that was that's essentially the construction of the entire idea going into it. Now, the suit is filed like pretty quickly after by Hogan, right? And this is for breach of contract and defamation of character is what he's alleging.
Yes.
And at what point are they making the ruling on like the defamation part? That is kind of where he gets the pushback from, but continues onwards. And for years, it's the breach of contract that is sort of the crux of the suit.
Yes, both in terms of the creative control, but also to a degree as far as like pay-per-view bonus payments that he was not paid that he should have been, because he's supposed to be guaranteed those, I think, regardless of if he appears on the pay-per-view, or no, he technically is supposed to be getting them as advances. And after Bash at the Beach, he wasn't. I'm trying to remember, did they countersue? Because they tried to ask him to appear at Greed at the final pay-per-view.
Mm-hmm.
And he said no. And I think that was probably just a legal strategy. But, okay, I forget. Had they been sold to had they made the deal with WWF yet by the time Greed happened?
It has. That's like March 18th. I don't think it's finalized.
I don't think. Well, no, it wasn't finalized till after WrestleMania. But I
mean, it's not like it's 9 days before the simulcast, so I don't think.
That's right. It was the Wednesday or the Thursday before the simulcast.
That's what I'm thinking.
When it was announced.
Yes.
So yeah, but still, like, and one of the things I found interesting when I was reading through everything to try to jog my memory before doing this show with you guys, that I found really interesting was in Brad Siegel's deposition, he explains that deferring paying Hogan had nothing to do with the lawsuit or anything. He says it was all about the losses and that they did not have, and like when they would have to record paying Hogan the pay-per-view bonuses and keeping those off of WCW's books until 2001, which is really interesting for this reason. If you look at the WCW pay data, his payroll is all under what he would have been guaranteed for pay-per-views. The assumption I had made, and I think that others had looked through the data and made, was that, okay, we always heard about the Turner Home Entertainment involvement and maybe Hogan having part of his contract come from there. Maybe the pay-per-view stuff was not on WCW's books. But now we have Brad Siegel saying under oath that it was. So that's just another angle where who knows really what money WCW actually made and lost over the years, because the accounting was just so creative.
And so Hogan's deal, is it through May of 2002? That's when the 98 contract runs until for Hogan?
Yes.
Okay. And he gets some kind of buyout like a few months prior so that he can go to WWF.
Yes.
Okay. So, because just doing the timeline here. So WCW ends March of 2001. Hogan goes to I don't know if he signs in January, but he appears in February of 2002. But this suit, like, it continues to drag for years at this point and goes until 2005. And like, that's the other part. Like, at the end of this whole thing, Russo and Bischoff can't even agree on how this thing ended. Like, if there was a settlement, if it was thrown out, like, you as the viewer, like, if you're not watching this with any kind of supplementary research or information, like, you're left just not even knowing how this case ends. So, like, you don't even have these two being able to agree on how this thing ended. If there was a settlement, if it was thrown out by a judge. And again, maybe some of that you give some leeway on memory, but that to me is a pretty significant part of the story of like, how did this thing end? Could have been a settlement, could have been just thrown out.
I mean, from Russo's perspective, I guess it's that it was thrown out because once the defamation is out of the picture, I don't think he's even a party to the lawsuit anymore.
Then it just is WCW on the hook essentially for the aspect of the breach of contract.
Right. I think the settlement was July 2005, so 5 years.
July of 2005. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the old-timer, which is, I think there might... I'm trying to remember exactly why it dragged out for so long, but the Billy Eadie, Randy Colley lawsuit against WWF over the demolition gimmick, that ran for like a decade total. Like, that, I believe, is the record holder, so to speak.
Oh, the Kung Lee suit, they're in hot pursuit of that one then.
They're at almost 9 years, I believe.
I came away from it with it sounding to me like somebody says Hogan got a 7-figure settlement. It was another way for him to get more money. Okay, and is that true?
I mean, we don't know. It's not like it was.
Right. He refers to it as like he didn't tell me the number, but that's what he believed. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what Eric says.
Yeah.
Which is a great headline. That's what Eric says. Hogan and Bishop. Could you imagine Hogan on this episode? Like, I know he's an absent voice, but I don't know if it would have just been just the carnival with Hogan thrown into all of this. The people that probably would have been, because at this time, your creative team, I guess you're looking at like Ed Ferrara is still in the mix. Is Bob Mould in the company at this point, I think?
Bob Mould, I believe, quit when Russo was brought back.
Okay, so then he's gone at this point. Yeah, because I was trying to like just like who are the people that are even in the room with Russo at this point? Even ones that, I mean, how attached would they have even been to the specifics of this if this were sort of a Hogan or a Bischoff Russo, negotiation as well?
Yeah. I mean, I think Terry Taylor was on the committee at the time in some form. So yeah, I think it's some mix of like Russo, Ferrara, Terry Taylor. There are other people that are just kind of in the room, like, but not really necessarily having power, like Randy Anderson. So it's a mix. One other thing, like, and I get why they didn't go into this in the episode, because I think there's only one person who's actually said it under oath, and it would have been a whole can of worms, is that there's also the whole issue of, the testimony in the racial discrimination lawsuit alleging that the Booker T idea was specifically to try to quell the racial discrimination lawsuit.
Right.
Which... Again, is a whole nother can of worms that they would not have had time to discuss in any in the way it would deserve in the episode.
Yeah, they've got season 5 to think about as well. I think WCW is a well they can continue to go to for seasons to come if the show is renewed. I guess the final thing, and then we'll go on to a lighter topic, which is how many people attended WrestleMania 3. But in terms of Russo's pivot, like leaving WCW, how does this case play a role in his ability to go to TNA? Like that was always like it had to be under lock and key that this guy was working with TNA during their early days. Like, was this like what would have occurred for Russo to make that move? And was this a stumbling block at any point for him?
So the way it was reported at the time in the Observer, and I think also the Torch, was that Time Warner was paying Russo's legal bills for both that lawsuit and I guess potentially the racial discrimination lawsuit if he were to be added to it, which, just for the record, he was never a party to the lawsuit. He's never named personally in the, and I should say lawsuits because it's technically like a dozen, but with overlapping discovery and stuff. And their stipulation, though, was that because they're paying for his legal fees and I think also still paying him some income because he had a pay-or-play contract, was that he couldn't work for any other wrestling companies. Even though at that point they're not in competition with Time Warner, for whatever reason they put that restriction down. So his early TNA consulting was secret. The work he did for World Wrestling All-Stars before that was secret, and then kind of handed over to Jeremy Borash. And then it's right as TNA is launching that Russo gets this WWE offer. And Russo, I guess, I don't know if it's because of the money or because of just the name value WWE carried or being the ones who bought WCW's assets or whatever, he's able to convince Warner to let him take a wrestling job because of that. He gets fired, what was it, like after 2-3 weeks?
I think it was like 2 or 3 days in WWE.
I mean, I think he was actually there for a few days and then maybe officially fired a little after that.
Okay.
But
what year would this be by then?
2002.
Okay.
And then Warner had already opened that door, so they weren't going to stop him from going anywhere else, and then he officially goes to TNA.
Fascinating. Just fascinating. Well, on that note, we also want to talk with you because a couple of years ago on Deadspin, you did a pretty extensive dive into the grand mystery of WrestleMania 3's attendance at the Pontiac Silverdome in March of 1987, and it's again a very relevant talking point as we get set for All In, because there's nothing better than an attendance controversy that has an AEW tie-in that Brandon has just been greatly waiting for his mentions to point out to him. So, Brandon, what is the latest number that we have roughly for All In?
For All In, I think I have it up on my screen here. So the WrestleTix has a daily tracker, and the latest number, I'm scrolling to is this today? Yesterday? This is as of yesterday. Distributed is 78,773. Estimated paid is 73,372. So around 73,000 estimated paid, around just under 79,000 estimated distributed.
So we are pretty much right in the ballpark of where for a long time has been thought to be the attendance that Dave Meltzer has reported through both his the internal records he was provided by WWF around 22 years ago, and through the building certificate from Zane Bresloff, who was the promoter with WWF at the time. So this many years later, Bix, since you wrote that piece, I mean, do you feel that you have a clearer understanding of the attendance figures at the Silverdome? And I mean, you did an exhaustive amount of research. I just reread the article this morning, and I was very tempted. Someone's got to do that head count at some point. There is a high res shot that Bix includes in the article as well. If you are so curious as to go do the head count, which I'm surprised someone hasn't done.
I don't know that you can actually. I've looked at it, and I think I'm looking at the most high resolution version of it. I don't think you can actually distinguish people. Something that I was considering doing, and I started like 1/6 of the work on it, is and this is assuming that there hadn't been drastic changes in the stands between when the building was destroyed and when WrestleMania 3 happened in 1987, is that there are some really nice high resolution photos of the empty stands just before it's demolished, and I think, and maybe you could count all the seats that way. I think a lot of this debate, I hope I'm not jumping ahead, but a lot of this debate hinges on what the real football capacity was for the Silver Dome, and whether or not the supposed capacity of I believe 80,300, something like that, whether that's the real capacity or whether that's exaggerated as well.
Okay. So first things first, I should note too, and I'll send John the link so we can put it in the notes and stuff. I did do a follow-up on my Substack a couple years ago when I found some more information that got us a little further, and kind of to where my conclusion is now, which I think Brandon agrees with. So there are a bunch of elements in here. So the big one that's always kind of confused people is, thank you for putting that up there.
No better headlines in the business.
So your announced attendance is 93,173. The Meltzer number that he got from Zane Bresloff and later WWE, and lately Dave's said other places too, including the Athletic Commission, which he never said anything about until people were arguing with him online in the last year or so, that they all had roughly 78,500. And I forget the number of comps. But the Silverdome's football capacity, so basically all of your fixed seats, was, I don't forget which was when, because there was a remodeling, and I forget which was the bigger number and which was the smaller number. But I want to say it's like 80,600 at the time of Mania 3. And then by the time the Silverdome is demolished, it was around 80,300.
So what we're showing on the screen right now is a photo of my personal copy of the 1992 NFL record book that shows the capacity for all NFL stadiums. So 1992, not 1987, but it is listed as 80,500 for the Pontiac Silverdome.
Right. And then on the field at Mania 3, and wrestling historian Max Levy has counted from the high-res photo, he was able to ballpark, and this seems about right, about something in the neighborhood of 6,300 fans on the floor. So that then takes you to there being like a little over 72,000 in the stands. So the question becomes, is the capacity worked? Which feels like a distinct question from our attendances being worked. In particular because, particularly in the 80s, the NFL had these local blackout rules in some markets, I think, but Detroit was one of them, where I forget if if a game didn't sell out or if a game specifically was under a certain capacity. I think it was just didn't sell out.
Yeah,
you could not watch a Lions game on local
for this reason in my area.
Yeah, you couldn't watch a Lions game on local TV. It would not be aired. Or if it was on a national outlet, it would be blacked out locally. And so everyone knows in Detroit that the Pontiac Silverdome's capacity is whatever was 80,000, 611, something like that. So there becomes this question of like, would they have really worked that? And and I had tried. Forget if this is in the Deadspin article or the follow-up. I had tried, talking to the city of Pontiac because it was a publicly owned building, and whether it's just straight up certificate of occupancy from the Department of Buildings or more specific stuff about the Silverdome from the city-owned thing that ran the Silverdome, the records are basically all gone because they had a financial crisis years ago, and they had a emergency financial manager take over all the finances for the city, and he never returned the records for some reason. And I remember when I reached out to records officer, they seemed very frustrated that these records had never been returned. So in terms of getting anything like official government level, it doesn't look like it's going to happen. I mentioned in the Deadspin article, I did a FOIA request with the Secret Service because it's reported in the, I think the Detroit News or one of the Detroit papers right before Mania 3 that the Secret Service would be attending Mania 3 to do security planning for the Pope's Mass at the Silverdome later that year. So that also to me suggests that we're talking about two crowds of roughly the same size. If they feel like that's not something they could do by playing, you know what I mean? If they were, if they could do it at a Lions game, they would have done it at a Lions game, but they're not. So go ahead.
And to be clear, so if let's assume for the moment that let's say that 80,600, 500, whatever it is for the football capacity, if that were legitimate, and we're looking at a photo here, looks like it's pretty full. Is there any reason to doubt that all the tickets for WrestleMania 3 that could have been sold? Is there any reason to doubt that it's not like a legitimate sellout? And we don't have part of what we have here that we have today. Is there's no production kills really, right? There's no giant stage like there would be today. The whole stadium, it looks like, is being used in addition to what's on the field. But is there any reason to think that, well, there were some tickets that just weren't sold that don't even allow us to get up to that capacity?
Okay. It's a legitimate sellout. We know that for sure. The local papers were telling people it is a sellout. You cannot get tickets a few days out. It's a WWF show. They are not going to announce locally like that it's sold out if it wasn't sold out. Although, okay, I tell a lie, because then a few years later, for SummerSlam 92, for some reason they run the TV spot saying that Wembley Stadium is sold out for SummerSlam, even though it wasn't. For some reason, that wasn't only for non-UK consumption. Who knows why? So there is one time they did something like that, but still, I mean, realistically, this was sold out, and there's other complicating factors with that too. So this was something I had no idea about until I wrote the Deadspin article. But it makes sense. Unless you read those local newspaper stories, you don't know it's sold out. And it's wrestling in 1987, so there are a lot of people that are driving to the Silverdome thinking they can walk up and buy tickets. So, and I should add too, like the local WWF TV show would not have been sent out to the local market. I should rephrase that. It was sent out before the sellout. So, for the most part, a lot of people that wanted to go but didn't have tickets yet probably thought they could get tickets. And as I learned from both a Deadspin commenter and also then WWF photographer Tom Buchanan, great Facebook follow, by the way.
Yes.
They realized, like, oh God, we could have an issue here. There are thousands of people here without tickets. Let's let them in and hang out. Like, they won't just want to be here. Let's let them in and they hang out around the concourse and in the bathrooms and stuff. Tom Buchanan told me he thinks he has pictures. He knows he took pictures of it. I think he wasn't sure if they were pictures he would have still had or if WWF did.
So there's potentially more people in the stadium, more fans who paid for entrance than there were seats.
Right. And it sounded like it could even be a few thousand. So there's that too. And then if we're doing the McMath on all this, in terms of arena staff and WWF personnel and everything, there was a good another 3,000 people in the building. I think more. I think it was like 3,200 at least. So
and we're talking about that. That's the announced number, which
yes, as far as getting to the 93,173, yes. So another factor in all this, going into the show, the number you see everywhere in the media, pretty much everywhere until the last couple days, is 88,000.
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere. In the Observer, in local newspapers. And then what became most interesting to me, and what really kicked off me looking up more and doing that follow-up on my Substack, a WWF press release when they crossed 80,000 about a week out, 88,000 about a week out. Here's what I found interesting about that. There's no follow-up press release after Mania to say, oh, we did even better, it's 93,173. So, yeah, it's a time where Titan Sports is a private company, but to me, that kind of read and still reads like saying that 88,000 is really the legit number. You know, that 93,000 is the entertainment number, but we're putting out this press release because this is a legit, huge, maybe record number. So there's that too. And then one of the weirdest things about all this, I want to say it was the last advance that Meltzer reported in the Observer, I think maybe 2-3 weeks out, it's in the Deadspin article, was 78,500. AKA the number he reports as the total attendance now. I don't know what that means, but I don't feel like it can be a coincidence.
Mhm.
So there's that, and I feel like I'm forgetting one or two things before we really get deeper. But it just... okay, now I remember. Despite the sellout, though, there are fan photos you can find, and there are moments watching the show where you can see that there are a lot of empty seats in the upper deck. Are those mass bathroom breaks? Are those people who didn't arrive yet? Are those unsold scalper tickets? Hard to know, and hard to get a good count for how many. But we also know there were then thousands more people coming, maybe thousands, still a large number of non-ticketed standing room fans in the building, too. So it's hard to figure out the balance there. But anyway, so as far as 88,000 and the other reasons why that seems like that could be a legit number.
Let me throw out this hypothetical. I'll throw it out to both of you, but starting with Brandon. Okay. So all incomes, and let's say the real number that they end up, let's just throw out 82,000. Okay. Is the number they get in Wembley. And AEW puts out a press release, and it's suddenly on that Monday morning, you go to whatever some big trade picks this up, and it is promoted as the largest attendance in pro wrestling history, is how AEW trumpets this big number. Is there any response from WWE to either cite this show, to use the WrestleMania 32 number? Do you expect any kind of a response? I'll start with you, Brandon, in terms of WWE disputing if it is a big, like, national, like, sports media covering this, the largest pro wrestling attendance ever that AEW tries to hang its hat on coming out of this event.
It would have to be really big. I think they try not to publicly respond to AEW and to pretend that AEW doesn't exist. I'm trying to think, what are the occasions where they've really addressed AEW specifically?
The first week of Dynamite, they responded to the number, right?
Marathon, not a sprint. And Nick Khan's made some comments that, really downplay their existence, blinders and all that.
Never met the kid. Never met the kid.
Yeah. Seems like a good kid. I don't think so, unless it becomes a really, really big story, but I don't think so. And there's WrestleMania 32 to think about too. I mean, obviously they've announced an even bigger number. That's the one. If they're going to point to a record, they claim that they broke the record of WrestleMania 3 at WrestleMania 32 with 101,763. I don't think they did, though. But I don't know if we want to jump that far ahead here. I think
so. For context, the WrestleMania 32 number is like, it's announced publicly as like 101 and change.
763, yeah.
763. And then, Brandon, you got the turnstile count of 80,702. I think
709.
709.
Yes.
Don't want to offset those 7 individuals.
Right. And there are also people who point out, though, that there were a lot of ticket scanning issues and stuff at that show.
Okay, but the paid, and I think what we're really, the core of what this conversation will be about is like how successful was this event? Yeah. And that's not determined so much as how many fans were in the building, but how many people paid for tickets. Right. And we know from the key performance indicators and the math that you can do around it. There's a huge rainstorm happening here. I hope you can't hear that. But that the key performance indicators indicate that because of the averages with and without WrestleMania, you kind of do the math, and it looks like the paid attendance for WrestleMania 32 in 2016 at AT&T Stadium is around 80,000. So even if there were ticket scanning issues, even if a lot of people got in without their tickets being scanned, it looks like the paid attendance, people who bought tickets for WrestleMania 32, is around 80,000. Maybe that doesn't include suites, though. And I know AT&T Stadium's got some big suites, so I can't dismiss that part.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember, what's the comp number? Okay, it's 2,300 comps is the number for Mania 3, roughly, for what it's worth. And we know that is the number regardless of what the actual attendance is.
Right.
Because I believe Meltzer was told it at the time. He was told 2,300 comps, you do the math, something like that.
So that would, as you put it in your article, 85,000 paid for WrestleMania 3.
If it was 88,000. Yes.
Right.
So here's where we get to how it seems like 88,000 is the real number. Later days of the Silverdome, where, there's no permanent tenant, there's no more Detroit Lions playing there, they're playing at Ford Field, etc. They have a website, silverdome.com, that really just exists to drive rental business to the stadium. Keep that in mind. They do give the 93 173 for Mania in like a trivia section, and they also give a completely new, presumably made up number for the Pope that was higher. At the time, and like in subsequent years, you'd hear like from Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez that like they listed the 78,500 originally, and then wrestling fans harangued them, so they changed it, but they knew the Pope did more, so they made up a new Pope number. And that Pope number, like I forget what it was. It's like a little bit more in like 93 and change. You cannot find any trace of that until this website. But there's no trace on the Wayback Machine on an Internet Archive of there ever having been the smaller number on the website. And based on when the snapshots are on the Wayback Machine, if it had ever been there, it was only for a few weeks. It wasn't years, like people had said before.
If you Google it, we have the Pope attendance just after WrestleMania 3 in 1987 is 93,682.
Yeah, right. I'm sure this is just as debated amongst the Catholic Church followers that always bring this number up.
I mean, I reached out to the Archdiocese and they didn't have anything. I really did.
I just want that quote to live in infamy. I reached out to the Archdiocese. David Bixenspan, the best.
So here's the thing, though. On that silverdome.com, they broke down the attendance by section of the building and types of seats. And where it gets interesting, you take out the suites, you take out the club level seats. All of a sudden, the Meltzer, Breslov, etc. number makes sense. I could pull up the exact number, but it's like it's in the 72,000. Or, well, no, wait. It would be in the 72,000 range. You add in the floor seats, you add in the club and suites, and all of a sudden you're at roughly 88,000. And I have talked to someone who sees building settlements these days that Brandon may or may not also know. And they've told me, oh yeah, those oftentimes don't have like the suites and stuff. So,
I mean, I can say I've seen ticketing audits, and we discussed the in the case of WrestleMania in Tampa, the one with the half capacity, we saw those ticket audits that we got through public records requests through the Tampa Sports Authority, right. And we saw that there were separate ticketing audits, separate gate receipts in essence for the suites versus the standard seats of the stadium.
Right, and not knowing specifics about the stadium, there's also the possibility they're not going through the same turnstiles too.
Yes.
Like I think about the one time I went to a show at a suite at Madison Square Garden. We did not go through the main ticketing area. There was an area off to the side at the main entrance. You go up an escalator towards the suites. So it stands to reason that was not in there. Now, where this gets tricky is, like, obviously you would think Zane Breslov would know that. In sending the stuff to Dave and saying, like, oh, no, the number's really this, that's the part I have trouble reconciling. But, like, you look at everything.
People don't know, Zane Breslov is the former WCW and WF live events executive who Dave attributes this information to.
I mean, he was the local promoter of WrestleMania 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
And passed away 20 years ago, for those curious.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to Steve Harms, who worked for him, for the Deadspin article, and what was it? I think he says he thinks the 78,500 is a legit number, but he's not sure it's the entire number. Let me see. But you do the fact that the math works out so well, and everyone, including the Silverdome, was saying 88,000, going into the show. That feels to me like it's right. And then the thing is, too, you throw in, to do the WWF math, you throw in those standing room fans, you throw in the personnel, you can get up to roughly 93,000 in the
Count the
building.
security outside. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so here's what Steve Harms told me. It was about a week before the event, Zane mentioned to me that they could probably sell 90,000 tickets. They wanted the Silverdome to look full for TV, so it was time to ramp up the comp tickets, and that's what they did. I don't know or remember how many comps were out there by the event date. He knows former WWE employees who agree with the smaller number being the real one. He's also not sure if the total number of people in the if that's the total number of the people in the building or just number of tickets sold. Does that number include comps? Probably not. I'm quite sure there weren't 93,000 people there, or 90,000 for that matter, at the event. So that's what he said.
Yeah, I'm doing all this in my head as we speak here. I guess. Yeah, we absolutely do.
And just to be clear, by the way, like Brandon and I have talked about this, and he cited, like Brandon, I think, is in agreement with me that the roughly 88,000 ticketed fans appears to be the real number.
Yeah, what would change my opinion is if somebody could show that the football capacity really was not 80,500. Yeah,
of course, but they're not lying about the capacity, and it was only a few hundred seats difference in 2003 or whenever it was that they had the website. They're not lying about how many seats they have down to the section when they're just renting the building for high school graduations and stuff. This is an advertising tool. They need to have the actual number of seats there. So, and for like, events with stuff on the field, like political rallies and religious events, whatever, it did list the capacity as something like, I think, 90,000.
What would the attendance have been if there was a Trump rally at the Pontiac Silverdome in one of the last elections? Then we
the actual attendance,
more than
or what he would say it was.
What he would say, of course.
He would say 150,000.
There you have it. You would have all the attendance records. Ford Field, Pontiac Silverdome. You'd have them all covered. I guess as we look at present day, Brandon, like when it comes to like what Polestar reports and such, like are suites and that such, like is that all figured into the numbers we see on something like Polestar? Does it differ by venue? Like what is your kind of read on like when it comes
I would have to look at what I got from the city of San Antonio, if that included suites. I would have to look. I think it might vary. I don't assume when I look at those numbers, like say the Polestar numbers, I don't assume that includes suites, because I think in a lot of stadiums, and somebody who knows more about these venues could correct us, but I think in a lot of cases there are people who hold access to those suites for the entire season, or maybe for all events in the venue.
It's pretty much that. I mean, I can tell you when I went to SummerSlam 98, because my dad had a friend at CBS who had spare tickets, they held the suite year round.
Yeah. And then that comes to the question, like, what are we monitoring here? Are we monitoring just physical bodies inside a building for an event, or are we trying to get a gauge of what level of popularity this event is generating, and we specifically tie that to people physically purchasing tickets to go to an event because they are drawn to it? And if you are someone that you have a suite, it's like, you're interested in going to see this event, but it's also something that you're not spending any additional money to see this event. So what are you weighing with those added numbers? And we can sometimes just get lost in like the volume number that WWE certainly puts such a high premium on, but look, what does that number mean?
Right. I think you just got to go with both. Something I do want to mention too, I almost forgot, as far as, the standing room, we need to keep in mind too that like there's a confirmed time where they let a ton of extra standing room people in to set a building record. WrestleMania 18 in Toronto, they let a ton of, I forget if they charged or not. John, you were there, you'd probably know better. But they let like thousands of more extra people in there so they could claim a fairly legit Skydome record.
Well, I definitely didn't get in for free. I can confirm that aspect of things, but it was like, I would not be, certainly once the show is starting and you just want to like fill people in, like there's plenty of, room that you can accommodate, standing room, for a lot of these buildings that you're talking about. That again, you can certainly look at like a number, and then if you are able to filter in more to just load up that number. And they're also basically undocumented. It's like you can't even necessarily dispute it if you want to throw some number out. And like we're talking about the Silverdome now, of like the potential of people just getting in at the end.
Yeah. Now, I have a question for Brandon, though. For Mania 32, do we have any indication of how fans with tickets in like the party area of AT&T Stadium, like the places that you are buying tickets to be in the building for the event, but you're not actually in the bowl or the suites watching the show? Do we have any idea how those would be counted?
All I have is an email from Arlington Police Department saying the turnstile count was 80,709. I think I did follow up with them about a year later to ask them if they had any details about whether or not that included suites. They didn't know. Don't you have the bid book and some information about that year's WrestleMania?
The bid book I have. Well, no. The bid book I have came later. What I have like all of the Arlington like audits like of every dollar they spent for that Mania.
Okay.
But I don't have
anything to do with the stadium activities.
No. When I checked, fun side note to that, Brandon knows the story. I don't think John does. So when I was doing all that research, to try to get, Mania host city stuff for what ended up being a Mel Magazine article about the whole, how much money are these cities spending, etc. One of the things I did was, okay, let me do a record request with the Arlington Police to be like, hey, here's this article from this Brandon Thurston saying he emailed you and you sent him this number. Could you send me what you used to arrive at that number?
And presumably they would know this because of security reasons, I guess. You want to know how many people are in the area so that you know what you're...
Something, yeah. And their responsive document was the email exchange with you, including your cell phone number that they did not take out.
Luckily, Bix already has my number.
To serve and protect. Wow, that's great. Here in an open carry state. Here's a random person's phone number.
I mean, I don't know. Boy, would you be interested to learn how many court records I've gotten that have people's social security numbers in them?
Guys, look out. Okay, David Bixenspan's got the magnifying glass out, so be careful out there. Well, we can kind of just let's put a bow on this just in terms of like the focus of why this topic is coming up, and that is All In, and just sort of some of your thoughts, Bix, on what this number represents for AEW, because it's really interesting that they are going to, like, by leaps and bounds, have their biggest show to date, and yet I don't think anyone's tying this to some kind of popularity peak, and if anything, it's a bit of a dip for AEW when we look at how they're drawing domestically. But what would you assess as just like the health of the company going into All In, and how you feel this show is going to be viewed in company history? Like, it's a gigantic feat for them.
I feel like we're not going to have a good feel for it until we're week of, because it's gotten better this last week, but we're still in that. It was only a week ago that there was still nothing announced for the show, and I think we're still so close to that it still kind of feels underhyped in that sense. So, because also, I mean, they weren't really mentioning it on TV either until last week, which was a whole other, to the point that Punk, in a very
made a crack about
way,
it. Yeah, it was like this
basically
big secret.
joked a collision that, like, what the fuck are you doing? But
like, it feels as we're several weeks out that it's the venue and the crowd is as much of a draw as anything else on this show. I would say it's the leading factor, that if this show is going to do above your normal range of an AEW pay-per-view, it's all because of, attaching, like, this is a historically significant show. And I think that is going to hit that week for people. And once you have a full card, like, the card it'll be a very good card on paper. I think everyone expects it to be. But Brandon, do you kind of lean on that in terms of, we've seen AEW, like, attaching something as historically significant, that does make a meaningful difference. I think it will for this one, but the idea of them, like, doubling, like, what they do on a normal pay-per-view, like, I think that's probably an unrealistic goal here. Like, I don't know how this is going to do on pay-per-view.
Yeah, especially with the fact that they're going to be doing another pay-per-view the very next week, asking fans to pay $50 on one, is it a Sunday, Saturday, whatever it is, and then 7 days later again.
On a WWE
John,
weekend too, that Labor Day weekend.
But yeah, John, do you want to give a NordVPN plug while we're here?
We might need. Yeah. On a side note, for those that are in Canada, the TSN Plus free trial ends today, and that's people's ability to watch Collision and Rampage. So I think NordVPN might be getting a lot of business from Canadians.
Oh wait, TSN Plus is not just part of your cable subscription if you have TSN?
So that is what I'm trying to find out today, is if my cable subscription gives me access to TSN Plus, the streaming service. I'm led to believe no, but I don't know that 100% yet. I've asked TSN, and we will see. If I don't get an answer, then that's probably my answer.
How many years had this been a free trial then? I'm very confused.
This thing launched around the end of last year, early this year. It's just been months of this streaming service that you've just had automatic access into. And if you don't have TSN on cable, like, this thing is $8 a month. And I can't fathom wrestling fans, if you're only watching it for Rampage and Collision, spending like that will drastically impact their Canadian fan base.
So it only includes the stuff that is not on linear TSN.
Yes.
Okay. So it's like ESPN Plus in that sense. I mean, well, it's the same company, right? So
yeah, they have a percentage of TSN anyway, but a separate topic there. But yes, the VPN services are going to be in full effect, I think, over this next month or so.
But I think this is. Oh,
go
ahead.
I was gonna say, like, I am curious. I think fight business you can't really gauge because it's going to do better in the UK anyway. There's more interest, etc. There's more promotion. So I don't think you can really try to gauge, are more people using VPNs or anything based on that. I am curious to see if maybe between afternoon and depending on how many people you're going with, potentially price, I am curious if movie theater business is up.
Yeah. I think it's incumbent on AEW to make this a really great show and put on a strong card. I mean, usually their pay-per-views deliver. Even, you know, I think of the first Forbidden Door, and, you know, feeling it was kind of a lackluster card going in, and it turned out to be a really strong card. But this is a really big opportunity for AEW to create not just, you know, another pay-per-view brand, but this could potentially turn into a WrestleMania brand and draw them tens of millions of dollars every year if it comes off really well, and if they continue to run a stadium show a year under this All In brand, which it makes sense to do so given the history of All In 2018 of being, you know, the precursor to this company existing. So it's I don't think this is just, you know, let's put on a house show here. We've already got, you know, 70 some odd tickets sold, and we'll make some more money on pay-per-view too. I think this is a really important moment for them to create a really strong brand for themselves, again, to draw tens of millions of dollars in revenue every year if they do well.
Yeah, there is also the X factor, though, of, I mean, it's pretty hard to convince me that there wasn't a different plan for how the show was going to be distributed, at least in the US, when it was envisioned. Because if this was always going to be a pay-per-view, do you really think they wouldn't have just made this all out?
I don't know. Who knows with Tony and wanting to commit to the tradition of doing Labor Day weekend in Chicago.
Yeah, but I mean, look, been a while since we've heard about the 100th anniversary of Warner Brothers tied into this show. You know, They completely stopped mentioning that. That was originally supposed to be a big hook along with the 100th anniversary of Wembley Stadium. So whether it was the plan was Max and they realized the live streaming wouldn't be ready, or that it was too big a gamble for this to be the first live event on Max, or they couldn't agree to financial terms or whatever. I can't see a scenario where this was planned as a pay-per-view.
Because David Zaslav did say on their earnings call last week, Max can right now, do live streaming.
I mean, just on a gut opinion level, not saying any of us have any inside information here. I mean, do you guys agree with me on that? That it still feels like this was not planned as a pay-per-view originally?
I think it was certainly on the table for it to be maybe a live stream event. Yeah.
I think it was. I think all the you connect the dots that I think it was always, worst case, we put this on pay-per-view, and not saying this is worst case, but it's like, this was their fallback. And I think, yeah, you could have looked at many different options for this. I think it's a real risk doing back-to-back pay-per-views, but this is also an audience that, I mean, maybe we will look at this and this is an audience that they're just going to buy both shows. But it certainly wouldn't be the ideal timing if you're going to add a pay-per-view that you would do it on back-to-back weeks. That, like, you've got to start kind of at least have a main event for this, for All Out going into All In. Like, I can't imagine they're just going to give you a cold card coming out of All In and give you 6 days to promote that. And it becomes very difficult if you're presenting, 2 competing cards and people have to choose between one or the other because they don't want to spend $100. Like, it's putting a lot on your audience that I think that will be a kind of a prevailing talking point going into those shows of, are people going to spend that? And do they have the time to watch both? Like, there's a lot of fans that will, hey, I'm watching Payback on the Saturday night. I've got my wrestling fix. Like we saw from this past Saturday, like people have a limit when it comes to wrestling. It's like, am I watching Collision and SummerSlam? No, I'm watching one or the other. I'm not watching both. And that, it doesn't even matter, I think, if there's a price attached to it. Like, there just is a breaking point, and it's realized each week with the hours that are necessary to keep up with these two products.
I mean, I think it was very instructive coming out of Saturday that the number Collision did, both total audience and in the key demo, was more or less identical to what that previous low July 1st show did, which was the same day as Money in the Bank, but not opposite Money in the Bank, because that was in the UK. And to me, previously it was like, oh, it was this extreme outlier, being taped, which that show was, doesn't usually hurt. So could it have been that? Maybe not. I think now that we saw what Collision did opposite SummerSlam, I feel like, we'll see how much of a pattern this becomes. Granted, it'll be head to head the vast majority of the time. To me, that just suggests that people were wrestling out for Saturday, and after Money in the Bank had no desire to watch Collision. And that's why the number dropped so much and recovered so much the next week. Because, again, it's with 0.13 rating in the demo and, a little over 400,000 viewers or whatever it was, like, that's enough of a dead heat with that July 1st number that I feel like that has to be the obvious inference.
Except for when the Shayna Baszler and Ronda Rousey MMA fight was on the screen, and the audience for Collision increased by about 10%.
Really? Is that true? It went up 10% on Collision?
I have it here. 12 and 13% during the quarter when that match started, yes.
Wow, that's interesting. And that was for the finish of a Christian Cage live promo. Oh, man. So maybe it was Christian's daughter that was like the big draw for that backstage segment. I don't know if it was Metalik and Jay White, but wow, that's very interesting.
Well, maybe it was that there was 2 Jay Whites in the segment, but Jay White and the Jay White card were cut out. Maybe that was the draw.
That's true. It was the twin magic that we had on Collision. All right. Well, Bix, it's been great to chat with you. In keeping with tradition, every time I have you on, I go way over what my time is. But have you noticed I've increased it every time I ask you to come on? Like, the first time was like, we'll talk for 20 minutes. This one I want to say was like 45-ish, and we only went an hour 10 here. So next time I just might ask you to come on. We're going to go an hour easily. But
all right, so plug time.
Yes, I want you to get everything out there. If you are interested in the debacle that was WCW in the year 2000, I certainly recommend Chris Zellner and David Bixenspan's deep dive into the sale of WCW. And you guys have just kicked off your latest Patreon series, looking at more WCW and their track record when it comes to the handling and treatment of minorities.
Yeah, so the podcast itself, Between the Sheets, available wherever you can find your podcasts, at BT Sheets Pod on Twitter, and then the Patreon. So the main podcast is we cover a week in wrestling history as it was, looking at how it was covered in the newsletters and playing clips of TV and stuff when applicable. And on the Patreon, if you're at the $5 a month tier or higher, at patreon.com/Between the Sheets, which John has helpfully put on the screen, and I'm sure will be in the show notes as well. We do a monthly deep dive into a specific topic. Sometimes it's a multi-part series, sometimes it's a one-off. And yes, right now, so for July, we did part 1. August will be part 2. on the WCW racial discrimination lawsuits, mainly about, the Bobby Walker, Sonny Ono, Hardbody Harrison, etc. lawsuit that gets kicked off in 2000, but also some of the previous stuff, like the previous Bobby Walker lawsuit, the Charlie Norris lawsuit, where Greg Gagne tried to teach him how to dance like an Indian, among other things. And we also talk about from when Thunderbolt Patterson was trying to sue, and this is like the first hour, I think, of part one, a interview that Ole Anderson gave to Thunderbolt Patterson's lawyers in 1992, when Ole was between WCW jobs. And I'm guessing John has listened to this already. I don't know if Brandon has. Shocking level of, if not bluntness, because it's Ole Anderson, then honesty about how WCW in the office would treat black wrestlers, and how, even though he recognized their value and wanted to do outreach in the black community, was willing to lowball black wrestlers because he felt like they didn't feel they could negotiate, among many other things. So,
yeah, if there's one of many takeaways from this show, it's that if you were an aspiring member of WCW's executive or creative staff, whether you're Bill Watts, Ole Anderson, or Vince Russo, don't do an interview right before your big job, because man, do they have a track record of saying some terrible things that could bite you, as you will go into Vince Russo's WrestleLine interview, a very famous interview in 1999 with his volunteering of his thoughts on non-English speaking performers.
Yes, and then also the ways he has kind of tried to reframe what he said, which is not really an accurate reflection of what he said, and how that affects the lawsuit and other things. And then, part two will be coming out later this month, and it'll include a lot of, again, a lot more, not necessarily in the weeds, but about the specific Sonny Ono and company lawsuit and all sorts of stuff. One of the plaintiffs who got a settlement being a guy who never wrestled a match for WCW. Lots of things that Terry Taylor and others said that were alleged under oath, as far as how they spoke to and about minorities. Specifically in part two, we'll be hearing about a dispute that Terry Taylor had with Harlem Heat. An article in A Magazine about the lawsuit. I just don't really know what A Magazine is, but the article is very interesting, where they talk to the plaintiffs, and I'll drop this detail. They also talk to Kaz Hayashi. And boy, is there some stuff in here that I can't believe I'd never heard before, that people are going to find very interesting about how WCW used him and how they treated his work fees and stuff like that. I'll leave it at that. But that's coming up then. So yeah, patreon.com/between the sheets. Like you said, other WCW stuff we've done include, it ended up being 4 different parts in 2 different little series about the sale of the company. Bischoff torch talk after he first got the vice president job, and so much other stuff. We have our various ECW shows too in the, or as we like to call it, the Eddie Gilbert, Paul Heyman canon.
Thomas Edward Gilbert, for clarification.
Thomas Edward Gilbert Jr.
Yes.
Professionally known as Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert. Looking at, when they booked Continental together. Earlier this year, we covered the year in the life of Paul in '93, where he starts in ECW and has the split with Eddie, but also is trying to get the thing going with Jim Crockett. And I feel like I'm forgetting some. And then, and of course, the death of ECW after the 6-part TNN series, which covers Into the Invasion. I'll drop this out there, since I'm sure this will be tantalizing for people who haven't heard it. If you want to know about the time Paul Heyman astroturfed the ECW Invasion storyline into happening by sending emails under dozens of burner accounts to wrestling news sites, patreon.com/between the sheets. And then coming up September and October, we'll be doing Todd Gordon's new book, Todd is God, and kind of comparing what he says to what was in the newsletters and what Paul and others said as far as the history.
This is a wild
book.
For those that have not read Todd is God yet. It is something. So
yes, I highly recommend it.
We look forward to all of that stuff, Bix. Thank you so much for jumping on with us, and hopefully people having a lot more insight now into many of these the WCW lawsuits and of course the WrestleMania 3 attendance figures. So we'll definitely do this again sometime, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Bix.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, there's David Bixenspan, a man who it was very hard at that press conference on Saturday to keep a straight face as one individual was speaking at length on the in front of the media, and I like his impression of one Paul Heyman is just it's one of those impressions that is now embedded in me that when I hear the original, I can't unhear.
Roman Reigns has tilted sports entertainment on its axis.
The Marlon Brando of professional wrestling. But yes, that was I didn't even get to chat with you. How did you feel about the press conference on Saturday? You did get a very good question in about Vince's role in creative, and Hunter giving an answer very beneficial to one Vince McMahon, but alluding that he is not all that involved, that he is not overriding anything or chiming in as much as maybe
which is not consistent with the reporting that's been out there that Vince has on multiple occasions driven a lot of changes on short notice to Raw and or SmackDown.
Which we don't know if maybe this surgery has impacted that at all, but I would feel very confident that at least prior to that surgery, he was very much making his feelings known.
Right. I think it's interesting to think about the politics there, that Pollock is apparently, comfortable not giving Vince a lot of the credit. I mean, I know he praised him and said without Vince, there wouldn't be any wrestling, perhaps. But he's comfortable not giving Vince too much credit for the success of the content lately, while just sort of downplaying the role that he has. I guess it shows that maybe they perceive that, they understand that people look at whether Vince is involved in creative as a negative. So yeah, I mean, I think, do you believe that he is as not involved as Pollock said?
I'm skeptical of that assertion. I absolutely do not believe that since WrestleMania. What his day-to-day is like again, I would have liked to have known more kind of about the severity of this surgery that he's had. Like, it's spinal surgery. Like, we're not talking about arthroscopic knee surgery that, I mean, in theory, like he's laid up. And is that diminishing his ability to contribute, or is it heightening the fact that he is, what else can he do? I don't know if we really get a straight answer in that sense, but one of the questions,
as I said on Sunday, what I was hoping to get at is, one, maybe he would tell us some example of something that Vince has contributed that was a good thing. I was leaving it open for that. But that, Vince's his reputation is that he's this tireless worker who never stops working, who doesn't get, you don't really get sick. You can work when you're sick. And if he's just giving counsel and talking, if all he has to do is have a phone conversation with somebody, that's something that you can do even if you're laid up in bed, I suppose, especially when Vince McMahon. So is that something that's going to, while he's on medical leave, keep him from, or not?
But yeah. And I guess the question I was interested to ask would as well be, does this medical leave coincide with the idea that even if he is healthy to return, is it a distraction for him to come back as this investigation is ongoing? Are they going to look at that as any kind of get this behind us before Vince is thrust back into this? But given the new information we have through Endeavor with their own earnings call, is that it looks like this merger is set to close imminently in next month. And the fact that, it's interesting, just the fact that you have Vince McMahon, who is so tied to this, and this merger is about to go through, and what is his involvement going to be at this critical point?
Yeah, well, Endeavor said on their call yesterday that it's going to close, they expect, in mid to late September. So that's a tighter timeline than we've had before. WWE just on the previous week had their call, and they said it was still going to be sometime in the latter half of the year, which is now. so we have some more clarity on the timeline.
And with that, I mean, this has been consistent, but I guess when people saw this, and mainly it was from your coverage of this call, the fact that there is going to be cost synergies, but this is not a new development, but it is just a, the fact that like this has consistently been stated, and like there are going to be cuts, and it's just a question of where they're going to be. And Nick Khan has at least given some leeway, or at least explanation, that there are certain areas that they want to be untouched. But whenever these massive mergers go through, I mean, there is a certain gutting process that is kind of the good and the bad that comes with these mergers, and good for the companies that can find all these savings, bad for the people that are kind of on the ground floor and working for these companies.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that the employees who have played a major role in helping WWE become as profitable as it's become, and have helped WWE become as monetized as it's become, especially in this last year where consumer popularity has increased, that there will be probably a lot of layoffs shortly after, I would think, this merger is closed. In terms of, I tweeted this is what was said, this is what was published, but a lot of the reaction is, oh, they're going to cut this and that talent. I don't see any obvious reason why that's going to happen. And Nick Khan has said that the areas that they're going to protect the most is going to be production and creative, and I would think talent. He didn't say talent, but talent goes along with that. I think it speaks to the difference, that the different way that wrestling fans look at these stories, and the different way that people who are covering WWE stock look at these stories. In that, for people who are covering the business side of this, and I don't mean me, but like people who are stock analysts and things like that, obviously they think, oh yeah, this means corporate employees, which it does, versus wrestling fans who, when they think of there being cuts, they think of the people who they recognize from television being cut. But I mean, I suppose they could close this merger and then develop a budget and say, well, we're going to spend less on talent than we are currently, and then obviously that would lead to cuts, but no obvious reason that is similar to the synergies that they talk about here, in that when you merge these two companies, you're not going to need a lot of the services. You're going to have a lot of redundancies in terms of providing WWE with the services that it provides itself with now independently.
Just on the UFC side, there was a pretty significant development today in the antitrust suit that has been going on since 2014. Today, this is after like over 2.5 years of, it's been relatively quiet on this suit. The judge involved in the case did rule that this can go forward, and they've certified this suit as a class action suit. So this would extensively, it will enable up to approximately 1,200 fighters that fought for the UFC at least one time between 2010 and 2017 that could be part of this suit and receive damages if it gets that far. And the whole the decision is, you can read it if you follow John Nash at Bloody Elbow. Eric McGraken is another great reporter, and yeah, we will see. It's a positive step forward for the case, and they are seeking damages between 800 million and 1.6 billion, which in a class action suit, those could be trebled if a judge rules in their favor. So this could be an enormous amount that the UFC could be slated to face here. And I think you would automatically look at how the UFC and WWE have very similar makeups in terms of how their talent and fighters are paid, and whether they see both industries as similar as well. But it's a big case, and it's been going on for nearly a decade, but it was a big step forward for those involved in this case.
Yeah, I don't pretend to understand the legal issues that are happening here. If it's terrible news for UFC, I mean, the Endeavor stock and the W stock aren't showing it. Endeavor stock is still up 6% on the day, and W stock is up 2% on the day. I have seen people ask me, does this mean? I mean, look, you got a class action lawsuit here, and it's an antitrust lawsuit against UFC. You have an antitrust lawsuit against WWE in the MLW case.
Yes.
That sounds like it's about monopoly and things like that. You would think that would come up in a regulatory review, whether UFC and WWE should merge. Perhaps we need to talk to a lawyer, but I don't get the sense that these issues are going to stop WWE from completing its merger.
I don't think so either. No. Lightshed Partners, Brandon Ross, who's a previous guest on our show, put out an update for their audience about what is the interest level of Fox when it comes to SmackDown. And Brandon Ross continues to be very skeptical and mentioning the past weekend's Big Ten realignment that gives Fox even more games to expand its football coverage, and questioning if Fox is going to renew its licensing agreement with the WWE. And he writes, "We remain unsure who will take SmackDown. We wonder if TKO will attempt to package SmackDown with the UFC as part of a Disney renewal after the TKO deal closes. However, that could be complicated for ESPN given the uncertainty around ESPN's future at Disney. In better news for WWE, we believe Comcast's NBC Universal will re-up on Raw fairly shortly. WWE programming is critical to USA Network's future since USA basically offers no other programming value outside of Raw." Ouch, if you're USA Network. Brandon Ross just slamming down your programming slate. But not wrong either. And this kind of continues like the next rights renewal. It seems like the ball that is up in the air is SmackDown. And just the way things are shaking out, it certainly seems that, that another home for SmackDown could be very likely in the scenario, unless Fox comes to the table, and I think would have to go above that $205 million figure. I think if that's their ceiling, I think I can't see WWE agreeing to no increase.
Right. It's so what we're talking about here is that the possibility that WWE could soon announce renewal for Raw. Does that involve NXT? Who knows? But soon announce renewal for Raw, that be complete in public, and still have the SmackDown deal outstanding. And if Fox is not a future home in it would be fall 2024, then the other players would include perhaps FX, which is owned by Disney. Disney just reported earnings, by the way, but would include maybe FX, according to a report from the New York Post. Could include Amazon Prime Video. There was interesting discussion that we talked about last week in terms of if you think about the next 5-year deal beginning fall 2024, that goes into like fall, if it's a 5-year deal, let's say, or a 4-year deal even, then we're talking about the fall of 2028 or 2029. By then, cord cutting has happened even more, and you've got an even less coverage of the tradition of the TV home universe. So maybe there needs to be a streaming component to not just your PLEs in your library, but to your core content, Raw and SmackDown. In the case of NBC Universal, well, I guess that could mean that there could be some simulcast at some point during the term of Raw onto Peacock. Could imagine that. What would be the streaming home for SmackDown? In the case of Fox, I don't know where that would even be. I think, as we discussed last time, because Fox doesn't have at least a subscription streaming service that WWE would fit well into. Fox Nation is not it. I don't think Tubi, which is a fast, is it either. So who knows? I mean, if it's on Amazon Prime Video, I'm concerned about the reach of Amazon Prime Video, even though, yeah, it's in a lot of homes. But it's not something, there's a lot of friction between me turning on Amazon Prime Video versus the vast majority of people turning on Fox, and the promotion that SmackDown benefits from by being on Fox and it being promoted during NFL games and things like that. So what Brandon Ross is talking about here is potentially, maybe, them waiting until the merger is complete, perhaps this fall, and then you've got a combined TKO, which is WWE and UFC, and UFC has its rights held by Disney, by ESPN, and maybe SmackDown rights could be dealt with UFC rights to Disney. It's very plausible. Sure.
Do you see any kind of effect on SmackDown if they were to go out and announce a Raw renewal and leave SmackDown hanging? Do you think like there is any value to that as opposed to just waiting till both deals are complete and we can announce it all as one tidy package?
Not that I can think of. Can you?
I'm just thinking of like it makes it clear SmackDown is on the open market, but I would think anybody that is in these talks is more than aware of that fact. I guess it also goes to show, like, if SmackDown is your quote unquote free agent, is there, like, granted, their numbers are doing very well now, but are you more incentivized to like load up this show when Raw can, is essentially, it's locked in that SmackDown should be your number one show, and whether it's just riding this bloodline wave or it's just putting more and more that this is the show we are shopping, and it is the one that we should be presenting our biggest valuable content on.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I don't know that SmackDown needs a ton of help as long as there's questions around whether Roman Reigns is healthy. But
bottom of the third.
That's right. But he rarely wrestles, so I mean, he's gonna, according to Sean Ross Sapp, he's not gonna miss his scheduled appearances anyway. And if all he's got to do is do backstage segments or stand in the ring and hold a microphone and wrestle every 4 months or whatever it is, he could probably get by.
Hail to the Chief this Friday night.
That's right. He's not missing that.
All right, let's finish off with just some television numbers. We went over these with Bixenspan, but Collision did 417,000 viewers on Saturday night, a 0.13 in the demo. So these would be their lowest since the July 1st taped edition of the show. And these also coincided, of course, with their first head-to-head with a WWE Premium Live event going against SummerSlam. So they were down 44% in viewership, 54% in the 18 to 49 demographic. So you were coming off a pretty positive number the week prior that had the FTR Adam Cole MJF match. And this week, if you wanted to know what the impact SummerSlam was going to have, this would give you a pretty good indication on top of a UFC fight night card as well that did very good viewership, 1.3 million viewers for the main card on ESPN.
Yeah. And for a ranking, which everybody's curious to know what it did for a ranking, because according to, I think it was a Fightful report, it's the ranking that the network is reportedly very interested in. This ranked among cable originals number 9, and I believe including cable reruns number 16. So yes, some episodes of Friends and an episode on Comedy Central of Seinfeld outranked in the demo Collision on this night. But SummerSlam is probably going to be the third biggest WPLE. Imagine this is going to go against WrestleMania and the effect that's going to have on this one. But I think we've got a big challenge coming up for Collision, and to see whether or not Collision can really stay focused on producing really strong shows that people want to tune in to see. They're going to be going against big sports competition in college football beginning in September. And there's going to be preemptions. The preemptions are coming. And that's really disrupted, I think, the regular viewership for Rampage. And will that disrupt Collision? Will that take the focus off of Collision and what it's about? Are they going to punt on a lot of these preemption episodes? We'll see. It's really important, I think, for their next TV deal, depending on when that gets signed, that they've got to continue to deliver a strong enough audience that it's, at least in the top 10 or something like that, better yet, top 5.
And the Raw number on Monday. So they had a commercial-free first hour. I was just texting with Brandon saying, you know what? Raw's not long enough. I don't get enough wrestling every week. Commercial-free Raw. We also had limited commercial breaks for NXT on Tuesday night, so they were doing that deal this week. But 1,888,000 viewers for the show following SummerSlam, 0.61 in the 18 to 49 demo. So they were up 7% in viewers, 14% in the demo, and up 22% among adults 18 to 34 for this week. And I have actually not seen the quarters yet, Brandon, but I'm imagining the first hour. What did you take away from the commercial-free hour? Was this an effective tool?
It did well, but it did over 2 million viewers for one quarter. I'm pulling it up now, but it did do over 2 million viewers for two different quarters at 8:15 and 8:30. I mean, it did pretty well. And then the LA Knight and Miz segment appeared to have popped a rating. Certainly in the demos, they crossed over into the 10 o'clock hour, getting close to 3 million viewers again for that quarter, and getting as high as a 0.66 in the demo for that segment. I think the remarkable takeaway, though, is that each of the last 3 years, if you look at the ratings that Raw did right after WrestleMania, it did like a post WrestleMania level number in terms of how much it popped versus the trailing 4 weeks. We're looking at like a 30% pop, 40% pop. I think there's just a lot of news coming out of those SummerSlam coming out of SummerSlam that people, I guess, tuned in for Raw the following week. Whether it was Roman Reigns' return, I believe in 2020. Maybe the Vince news helped in 2022. I'm not sure what was going on in 2021, but this was up a little bit, but not that much. Only like 8% versus the trailing 4 weeks, not the 20-30% we've seen in the past. Not a lot of news, I guess, coming out of this. I sure felt like it was a long show. I know we all did. got our.
Yeah, I don't know. It was a number that, like, I do understand, like, they are in, fewer homes versus last year. But I mean, even if you're looking, like, this was.
I'm looking at what was it doing lately the last 4 weeks.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great point. Like, like, again, 7% increase in viewership, and it was, the third most watched WWE event on Peacock in history. So a lot of people saw SummerSlam, and yeah, they got an increase, but it wasn't at your usual jump that you would see for a post SummerSlam. Like, I was just looking at like last year, what they followed, and I think some of that you can attribute some of that to, like, we had this period where Vince is removed in the lead up to SummerSlam, and I think there was some of that embedded in people that, okay, this is Paul's real start was after SummerSlam. But I still attribute it to it's post SummerSlam, and that was going to drive last year's number the most.
Yeah.
So there you have it, the latest on Raw and Collision numbers. My final topic for you is, as we are about a week removed from the Vince McMahon investigation disclosure, I guess what do you see as sort of do you imagine this is going to be something that is going to be just kind of in the background unless an indictment comes down? I mean, it would seem that is the next logical step in this whole process, and it's sort of just going to be this background story until, like, something like an indictment comes down, and then I think that would put this. It will be interesting to see if this becomes like a major story outside of wrestling, like Vince being indicted, or if this is just like last week, this disclosure was made. I wouldn't say it felt like a big Vince scandal in terms of the coverage it received.
Yeah. Or is this something that just is never followed up on? I think we need to talk to somebody who has, some legal background to get an idea of how much legal exposure is there for perhaps shareholder fraud or something like that. Because I think I have to think that is the issue at hand here, is that you spent somewhere around $20 million out of your pocket and didn't record that as company expense. That's probably fraud. How much exposure is there? Are there fines? What kind of penalty would he be facing?
Yeah, I think it'll be, it would be great to have someone on that has like a deeper sense of
go through a Rolodex.
Yeah, we have a growing Rolodex here at Pollock and Thurston headquarters. All right, well, that's going to wrap up the show. Again, a thank you to David Bixenspan for joining us, and you can follow along at patreon.com/Wrestlenomics, where you can catch Brandon with the rotating crew of Jesse Collins and Chris Gullo, who I believe Jesse will be with you this Sunday.
All three, I expect.
Chris is back as well.
This coming
triumphant
Sunday.
Return.
Yes.
So they will be live on Wednesday. Or sorry, is today Wednesday? Today's Wednesday.
Today is Wednesday. Yes.
I'm on G1 time. I don't know what day it is. I don't know what week it is. What I do know is that I don't have the latest standings. I think we have a winner of the.
Has the regular block play ended now?
The block play is done. Today's D block concluded. And going into today, Brandon Thurston, who just a few weeks ago was like just looking at his standing, and the E block standings, I don't see updated yet, but Brandon was in first going into today. So barring some cataclysmic demise, I think Brandon might be this year's E block winner.
What do I win? What do I get?
Oh, you get you get a 1-year extension of chatting with me every Wednesday. Okay. That's the grand prize. Yeah. Good. So good. I was really glad that Brandon from New Jersey didn't win. I don't think I could live up to that bargain. But yes, follow everything from Wrestlenomics. And what other things do you have out this week? You've been busy this week.
Somewhat, yeah. There is a live event report that is out. That's free for everybody on Wrestlenomics.com. If you want to read that, the comparing the live events for WWE and AEW, comparing them market to market, same event to same event. So, like, what did a Raw do versus the last time Raw was in that city? The moral of the story is, WWE continues to look very good. It's a mixed story for AEW, and we have a Google Trends report for companies. We're going way into the Japanese pro wrestling industry there with Japanese wrestling companies, as well as companies in the U.S. and Mexico. That's there now for subscribers, and we'll have tomorrow a talent. Who are the most searched for wrestling talent in the world? Top 100. That'll come out tomorrow morning.
A list.
Yes.
I love it. Yes. Usually whenever a list comes out, what I love are all the responses that are like, nailed it.
Mhm.
Perfect list.
That's most of
Exactly.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, well, look out for that. Tonight, Wei Ting and I will be live right after Dynamite on the Post YouTube channel, discussing Dynamite, and then we will hop on over at postwrestlingcafe.com, where we will chat about the world according to Marty Jannetty, the season finale of Dark Side of the Ring. And as a bonus, for anyone that downloads Rewinded Dynamite late tonight, early Thursday, you will get a bonus interview with Chris Hero, discussing his new role as a producer at AEW, as well as chatting about this week's West Coast Pro shows, and even a little bit on exotic Adrian Street. So that will be a bonus interview for those that download Rewinded Dynamite tonight. So check out all of that at postwrestling.com, Wrestlenomics.com. And that is it for us. Thanks to everyone for tuning in for another edition of Pollock and Thurston.